comincio una cosa in italiano che perché oggi ho scoperto che
Today I discovered that the Hollywood Party radio broadcast, the only things that's good made by the public service radio and TV for cinema, this week will not air. And why is not on air? Because it costs too much. So today, now, we have a press conference in Venice. There won't be any broadcast of Hollywood Party because Hollywood Party costs too much. Considering that we pay RAI, the national broadcast, and we are ashamed because the quality is terrible, really, of their programming, then, considering that, thanks to the we can write a mail to Mr. Andrea Montanari, the director of RAI 3, Radio 3, and also see how much does he make in terms of money. Please send an email to Mr. Andrea Montanari in order to ask him how much he saved in terms of money in closing down Hollywood Party. How much does he? Maybe he would save €2 that he will spend to do some terrible other programs. And how much do we lose because Cinema Ritrovato cannot be told by Hollywood Party, the press conference of Venice cannot be recounted, the Giffoni Film Festival cannot be broadcast, etc. And this is an absurdity. And consider we have to fight against this absurdity. We are a minority and thinking that culture is worthy. So then, and the Hollywood Party tells or recounts the stories of culture, and let us show ourselves that we are raging mad, because this is shameful. I was really raging mad. I love my country very much, but this morning I'm very furious, and also Bertrand would be mad as well. I started this way because I wanted to, the fact that Bertrand was shy, was a shy person, but instead we should say something else, that he was a real fighter, a fighter for culture and beauty, for values, and he was really a fighter for the right political movements, the sans-papiers, the immigrants in the 70s or in the 60s, the Liberation Front of Algeria, or in setting up the Lyon, the Lumiere Institute in Lyon. I remember he was here to introduce a movie, and there were people asking or fishing for autographs. And I remember him, he was very patient, and he signed all these autographs, many posters, many billboards, and also these autograph hunters wanted to leave. And you say, why aren't you stay to watch the movie? And they said, no, we don't come here to watch movies, we get autographs. Well, give me back everything that I signed, and I will give it to the people that I'll meet at the end of the screening. And that's what he did. And that was the first time the autograph hunter saw the movie. Yes, he was really full of delicate rage with audiences at times, people that talked about movies without having seen them. He could not stand that. And when we talked together, I could not talk about a movie if I did not see it, because he would have discovered right away. And so that's what he thought. Also, that's what he taught me. In order to talk about cinema, you have to have seen movies, and the movies. in Lyon, it was already like that. To talk about an author and a filmmaker, you had to see it. He could not stand, for example, that, well, he preferred, if he had to choose dinner or cinema, he used to go to see a movie. When we prepare the programs, schedule of films, it was at Cité Lumière. It was really complex because he had seen 20,000 movies, and he wanted to see like the last one, 20,000 plus one, and he always said, well, why should you watch these movies? I've seen it many times. Had we given to him the direction of the Lumière Theatre, then he would be the only one to watch, because he wanted to look movies that were strange and odd. He really had the integrity of audiences. He said that we should talk about the things that you've seen and to be a critic, but in a scientific way. So reviewing and saying, and also to criticize what was said about a film. So never taking anything for granted. He never rehashed, so he always was, find new development, new words. So often he said, well, about what he wrote as a critic on American movies, he said, well, I used to write that, but now I've made a mistake, because you're not the same viewer when you're 20, you're 30, 50, or 80s. So did 100 years of American cinema. You have authors or filmmakers that he did not love, and then he reviewed in his judgment, his opinion. He said he made a mistake on some film by De Palma or Peckinpah, because at times he overreacted to a given cult around certain filmmakers. He was averse not to movies, but maybe to the cult that some filmmakers had, as Marco Tullio sitting before us. Nobody wakes up in the morning saying, well, today I will do a terrible movie. You want to improve all the time. And sometimes in a career there are ups and downs. And he had this integrity of speaking about movies he had seen, and also films that he had seen several times. And considering that he was doing a stationary bike, so when he was pedaling on the bike, stationary bike, he would watching films, and he called and said, "Oh, I'm reviewing, I'm watching again a movie, then well, I watched another film." So today he makes the films. He watched and rewatch continuously his movie, maybe half of it one day and then another half the other day, because that's the first quality of a cinephile. Nobody has forgotten friend Jung, the head of Luxembourg Film Archives. The first edition of Cinema Ritrovato was due thanks to Fred and the Luxembourg Film Archives that gave us the print. And he was an incredible drinker, but he died quite young due to that, but he was really a great impulse for the film archives. And he said, well, he had to catch a train, but you still, oh, doesn't matter if I come late, because I have to see a little bit of a film. call me in the theater because I need to leave for the train. So I think that we should write something about the physical well-being the film buffs, cinephile, have in watching movies, because that's important, because we make reference to the platforms, or you just, you see movies at home. Well, if a movie lasts 2 hours, like Tarantino's movies, if you have to do something, you miss something. So the next 2 hours do not exist. You have to watch the movie. So Bertrand was like that. Well, some weekends were spent at his home, and he was constantly watching movies all the time. And this, that creates a different brain of if you start at 20 and you continue seeing movies until you're 80, constantly ongoing, and if you are a filmmaker or creator, all this will produce something extraordinary from an artistic point of view, from a social and intellectual point of view. He was extraordinary, meaning outside the ordinary. So you've seen the thickness of this book. So you can see the weight, and that's the pocket version of this book. So this is extraordinary. The depth of Bertrand Tavernier, that he infused in everything. When he introduced film, I remember an incredible recollection in Lyon when he introduced and explained how the Lumière Prix or award was assigned. He was like a swimmer, plunging, diving in depth, and then bringing you up to see the light and breathe air. It was a journey. The way he told stories and things. He never looked at the audience, but it was an exploration of himself. He looked deep into himself, and he was really deep. That's what we miss, the depth of Bertrand. When he wrote a lot when he was young about cinema, and he made a lot of interviews with Pierre Ossian. They were attaché de presse. And he started with the first edition of Un Ami Américain, and that's when we met and started working together, because I was admiring this period of this history of cinema and the history of cinephilia. He was also working with Jean-Pierre Cossonneau, and he started to think that he had to write about cinema. When I was at the university as a student, he participated in international conferences of cinema. And he said, well, they said, oh, this guy is only 20 years old and he's complaining about the things that were not yet screened. He has screened everything, but then he wanted to see. He needed to write. He had an extraordinary way of writing, because he moved his hands while writing in a very gentle way. He was an erudite. He didn't like theory and rules, because rules are changing constantly. He wanted to know the motivations. Nothing can replace the gaze on cinema that is provided by the filmmaker, because the filmmaker will always know from a technical point of view, in terms of approach, and will be able to understand what is missing in a scene and what not. There is a missing scene in this film. That's what he said. So he got informed. Yesterday I read about the Bas Fond, the new restored print, And there was this co-writer, Gian, if I'm not mistaken, that's his name. And I watched this movie and I thought about Bertrand Tavernier. He saw a name of someone and he didn't know exactly whose name belonged, and so he went around and looked everything about that. So Bertrand was an advisor to historians. But the oral history, for example, is splendid introduction and presentation of movies. And he said constantly, you don't have to be long drawn. Sometimes I pushed him and he said that he started to stop him telling the story of the film. He had to stay in Bologna two days, and then he stayed 1 week, and I said, introduce the movies, and he always said yes, but you have to be short. And then he answered me, well, I don't know, but then he was short the entire week, and it was incredible to have him as an introducer, a presenter of movies, and that's why we started this project, this journeying through the French cinema. His last project, he had to prepare a movie from a book of Russell Banks, as a protagonist Susan Sarandon, and she could not find the movies. So his last movie is a documentary on a love that he had for French cinema. I started the project because I wanted that this project were made. So he talked about many projects. So his words cannot get lost. So the movie prepared was a mix of variations, of theme, what he said, what he wrote, as a sort of a chamber cinephilia, as a chamber music. So he started speaking, and then something else came up to his mind. Charles Danet, at the end of his life, was a speaking machine. Everything came out. He left written testimonies. He was a great writer, but he was also great speakers of cinema. There are people who are cinephile but cannot either write nor speak. He had both qualities. He was a member of the board of directors of the Cannes Festival for some years, because he represented the SASD. He really fought for authors. He defended Turner to defend the Houston family. He fought politically as well. He found that the right that was blamed of not caring about culture, but instead in France it seems that the right was supporting cinema better. Francois Hollande came and reduced the budget for culture, and Sarkozy, he said, he focused, and Bertrand was really with Sarkozy and trying to convince him to fund more for culture. And we were in 2015. We were celebrating the invention of the gold palm, and we were celebrating that.
Marty de Delberman, et moi très fier d'avoir.
I was very proud that Bertrand would be there in the board of directors, which is something that was very official. And I said, well, we will make a small appointment in Lyon. Marcy, first Golden Palm, and Bertrand. And I wanted to astonish and surprise everybody, giving him the floor so that he would astonish everyone. And he remains He remains silent. Well, they said it's a flop, complete flop. And he said it's complex to talk about it. Let's start from the very beginning. Bertrand had paid too many taxes, and he had to lose some money to pay less taxes. And then he finds that the story of a worker and a woman at the beginning was fine, and then he tells us the story of the film, and everybody clapped their hands.
Il n'avait pas préparé, il n'avait pas révisé, il n'avait pas... Et on avait
It came out of his brain, and we had not prepared anything. And we had the possibility of knowing everything on this film. At the very end, the film won this award, and Castel paid a lot of taxes. And I felt love. I was so happy to do so that a board of directors as official as that could have this occasion and enjoy what we were living together every day, the happiness of being in his company. The sharing is the key. Sharing is the key. It was never so that there's a huge knowledge of literature, jazz, music, all the culture, all the facet, cinema, this huge knowledge was there to be shared. He received a phone call, and during the titles, everybody started talking, chit-chatting, wherever talked about this, and he would share, because it was a way, it was his way, it was his cinephile machine, intellectual one, so that he could ask opinions of that one and the other one. And I wrote a book, a film by Kurosawa on judo, and it was talking of the invention of judo. And when I was young cinephilic, I was teaching judo. I wanted to see that film. And when I met Bresson, well, he did not know that film. He hadn't seen it. And so I had that moment of glory. And he wanted to know everything of that film he had not seen. It was incredible to see a film that he had not seen. It was fantastic also to pull his leg a bit in public. Some time ago, there was a film he had seen, and I said, this is a film that Bertrand has never seen, and so he will see it for the first time with you. I'm talking about the cinephiliac. And at the same time,
ils ont co-inventé quasiment cette collection extraordinaire dont Bertrand parlait. Alors parfois, c'était des promenades. C'est-à-dire que là aussi.
And this collection of Western, Bertrand would talk about it. And we have to put all things together to understand the consistency of his journey. It was a journey of his youth when he would go and see the small films, and then the travel or voyage or journey of his older age. He would revise things, and he could revise.
Donc son image est devenue ça. Et alors que son image était d'abord.
And his image.
Avant l'Institut Lumière, l'image du cinéaste et uniquement du cinéaste.
Before the Lumière Institute, what had the image was the image of the filmmaker. But we know that there was also a cinephiliac there, and little by little, the cinephiliac became as important as the filmmaker. And when in France,
c'était de bonne aloi, c'était de bonne à la mode un peu de critiquer le cinéaste.
It was fashionable to criticize the filmmaker, Tavernier, but not the cinephiliac Tavernier. Then there was some people who would feel guilty and they were sorry to have criticized the filmmaker Tavernier, but so they would praise the cinephiliac. And he considered it to be normal. Well, your book is a fantastic book, but you know, you can even avoid loving films. And he starts saying, if you are a filmmaker, you not necessarily you cannot be necessarily, must not be cinephilic. It was incredible when at his death the French TV changed the programs to show his films that was seen by many and appreciated. And he would have liked it very much because he suffered from the fact of the strokes he had to bear with. And he suffered this global popularity. And it was around midnight. This was a film that jazz deserved. Often, when you're no longer present, you talk about this person. But there is something should be considered: the status of filmmaker, the status of cinephiliac. There are not so many Joe Dante or Martin Scorsese. But Joe Dante does not write, whereas he would have nice things to say. It's the encyclopedic character of these people. I witnessed some dinners with Tarantino, and he was always the strongest one. There was something. Martin Scorsese has a huge culture, American, English, Italian, and they had the same passion for the English film, and they both had it. While we know that in France there is not a good reputation for English films, and thanks or due to François Truffaut, and it's the truth. It's easy to say that we should revise all of this, but Truffaut and the Cahiers du Cinéma have not considered the English films. You can not love David Michael Powell but Martin shared with Tarantino a taste for B-series films. He was able to live or love Japanese films, and he was very focused on this. The last emails we have exchanged talked about Lezioni. He had discovered it, he didn't like them, and then he had met him and he was touched by the first films by Lezioni, and he asked me how to find others. And I believe that one of the merits, absolute merits of Bertrand is curiosity.
Son premier film, l'horloger de Saint-Paul, qui est coécrit.
Saint-Paul.
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 Il fait appel à Jean
Je le corrige un peu.
Orange et Pierre Bost. Et là, il fait une chose qui les condamne immédiatement parce qu'il rétablit un rapport. Il avait raison. Il avait complètement raison.
He was right. He did a nice film with an extraordinary script and demonstrated that Nouvelle Vague was wrong at this on this end. But actually, he didn't want to do it. he didn't want this. Here we have a very important point of the story that I'm exploring, because I have published a text on Bertrand, because we will homage him in Lyon. And Bertrand wanted to do cinema at the beginning of the 60s. Too early, at 25 years of age, in 1941, and films made like in sketches, and it's not ready. He tries to be an assistant. He is a bad assistant of Belleville. Bertrand was not able to organize, so he was a terrible assistant. And then he said something nice about Joseph Losey, and Melville had forbidden the troupe to address him a word to him because of his bad taste. So that meant that he was not liked. Then he becomes an attaché de presse, and that's how he learns cinema, through the experience of the directors, through the stories of complexity among the ones who create dialogues. For instance, there was an important relation between script writers and the ones who were in charge of the dialogues, and there was a blacklist. At that point, he doesn't think to make cinema, but he writes something. He writes a first script, but it was not good. And
Bertrand avait une passion pour Autant Lara que moi je ne partage pas.
Bertrand had a passion for Autant Lara, but I don't share this with him. But there were technicians killed by Truffaut for good and bad reasons. There was something. There was a trend in 1953 to say right things. There was a vase to be uncovered and have it exploded. So there's a letter of Pierre Bossa where he says, but it's not François Truffaut.
Ce jeune type tavernier va chercher Orange et Bost pour
and their young tavernier looks for denial of these kinds. And Bertrand said, I was a young guy and I couldn't write up scripts, and I wanted them to help me out. When at 30 years of age he does the first film, I wouldn't make it to make a film to correct Truffaut that had written this film in 1953. Then there were two categories: the enemies of the Cahiers de Cinéma.
In other words, he said, and he was leftist with the people from the right and vice versa. And also he applied the same thing with the cinephile. He tried to pick the best and not the worst from the worst. And we said it last evening, French cinephilia is made by Sartre, that is not well digested. And so, and Bertrand taught me that. I really loved Jean Jopert. It is Le Flangleur is a fantastic movie, and when I went to see his film because the film. So you have to tell me there is a good reason to go there, and so I followed, and I loved Jean-Marie Straub, Jean-Luc Godard, but Bertrand was very generous because. Well, Victor Hugo is one of his writers that he preferred the most. Then he learned something, so he invented the quotation. And Victor Hugo said, I admire like a brutish man. And that means that is a credo, a belief of generosity. You have to pick what is the best. And it doesn't mean that you love everything, that you're trivial or something like that. that. But I do think that Victor Hugo said so, but perhaps not, because that's what Tavernier said. We talked about many things. We participated in many events, and 34% of movies said they love a movie because of the plot. And he said, no, he invented that. Nobody else said so. He invented surveys or polls just to back up his own idea. And so the L'Horloge de Saint Paul, it's a movie, so that's in the U.S. and he went to Bosch to make everything. He put it where I want to make my first movie in Lyon, because it's the town of Simenon, a Simenonian town, because he loved the shadowy character of Simenon, the petty bourgeois, etc. So he made the L'Horloger of Saint Paul, so 72-73. So the father whose son killed someone, and he says, I won't judge justice, because but I will defend my son. In any case, this was a very strong topic. It's beautiful, this movie, and the camera accompany the Philippe Sard. And so he adapted the story, and he was blamed for that. Why? Well, so they told him that he was blamed to be against Nouvelle Vague, but also to be a filmmaker, also a script writer as well. So they prepared papers against him, and so they say he's a craftsman, he's a script writer, filmmaker, he doesn't believe in his characters, and then he is a good documentarist. Well, as an homme that loved to make documentaries, and also had made a change in law, but because in this history of there are people that are non-French citizens that were convicted for certain crimes, and then when they were released, they were kicked out of France. And there was this case, this person that worked with us because he went 3 months in prison for peddling drugs. He was kicked out from France, but he was French. So it is Sarkozy who changed the law, but that's because Tavernier really pushed him to do so and really fought for that. Jean Danet said one day, because so he made La Guerre sans Nom, the war of Algeria. It says we forget the Algerian war was fought in winter, on the snow, on the mountains. And Daniel said this is an image for a film by a filmmaker. And at the time I was, I met him, and so there is a line. So the Tavernier cinema was not really on the focus of Tavernier, because he was very harsh as a critic on certain movies. And when you say that, well, the Cahiers said, well, he's not a great filmmaker, but he's a very good documentarist. But this is not. And I try to reconcile this point of view that are extreme. Then Danet died, and Simone Mizrahi. Also, the trio, Mizrahi and Danet and Tavernier, they were before they died, Tavernier went to see them at the hospital when they were attaché de presse. So we are a family of thinkers, of filmmakers and critics, but we don't speak. We are not on speaking terms. Rivet said that, I wanted to be friends with Tavernier, but we could not find the common ground. So, and Serge and Tavernier called him to thank him because of his kind words. At the time, Godard wrote on the cahier, about Projet Tailleur. And he was somewhat complaining that he could not write that, considering that I was writing on the history of cinephilia. So, and then he was a great admirer of Roger Tailleur, and so Godard himself said that Roger Tailleur could not write anymore on the cahier, and that was too bad for that. And also asked Godard about that. And it seems that, well, it's good to fight, you know, to have different opinions, but it is also good to reconcile yourself. And it's also André Kirou, who was the enemy of Truffaut, because Kirou told that Langlois told Truffaut, be quiet, you know, because you have to. And also these things about the terror, you know, the colonel government in Greece, etc. And he told them to, you know, Langlois said, stop talking about that, otherwise people will be tortured. So then there are praises on the French cinema. I live, no, and Truffaut died too early, because then it would see how Bertrand, the old Truffaut, could go back. Godard once told me, I see the things, you know, you talk bad about something because you don't see what they do. And it would have been nice to see the new relationship of Truffaut and also Jean Douchet, like Truffaut saw the films in the 40s, etc. And then in the post-war period of the French cinema. And they would reject those movies to hail Nouvelle Vague. But Truffaut was not a Nouvelle Vague, but because he was also the attaché de presse. He worked with Rivette, Jean-Luc Godard, etc. He worked with Rivette in the Cahiers du Cinéma. So there was a way of reconciling. When he died, Libération, the newspaper, made a very negative article about that. And then you can say, the guy is dead, and then you should praise him. Is not, and then also we think about Libération could say, now Tavernier is on Netflix, now we are on the 21st century, and let us look all the film whether we made mistakes. No, so we did not like Tavernier movie, even watching it on Netflix. So the next day after he died, just putting one piece of news, well, it's not that bad. For me, it's no problem. Some people were really scandalized, but for me, it was because there was this war, this vendetta. So you don't know, the principle of vendetta is not that it never end. You Italians know what vengeance and vendetta is. But Bertrand, we don't know whether he arranged, he made peace with both, or if he changed his approach. But in the 60s, 70s, when I met him, he was quite harsh to deal with, because he could be very rage. And it was, well, he also was too ironic, you know, sometimes. It was spiny, in a sense. He took the journalist, and the journalist really, he could not agree with them. He had a temperament that did not belong to the family of the Cahiers de Cinéma, an extraordinary team and family, a dominating family of French cinephilia. And also, there were a lot of misunderstandings about the films and on his film, and maybe, of course, and I'm very interested in that. I'm not the director of the Festival of Cannes. I'm the young university student. I started to study the history of cinephilia, which is part of the intelligentsia, the history of intelligentsia of France. Okay. But nobody got interested in that. This is a long...
Cette génération différente, en partie née à Lyon.
So the cinephilia, there was a team, Raymond Bor, Charver, Duage, Lyon, Ledoux. Ledoux, I didn't know him, but it was Brussels, Luxembourg, Lausanne, Lyon, and Toulouse. These are the cities of the cinephilia, and that was another cinephilia vis-à-vis Paris. So this is part of the story. I'm not really interested in that for myself, to try to merge things and to reconcile things, to reconcile the breakups. Bertrand knew everybody, the international press, so he won prizes, etc. So he sold many movies abroad, and there are many things that many films that got into the international market, many movies, and perhaps
Romer n'avait pas réatteint le niveau qu'après il va atteindre en popularité. Il y a Manu
there are many beautiful things from the 70s. Then Rivette, there is on the side, and all of a sudden there is another generation, Tavernier, Blier, Corneau, Sautet, making a second career, Les Choses de la Vie, starting from 1969. Then there is another new generation changing a bit. Perhaps there are some mishaps, but Le Monde, the day after the death of Bertrand Tavernier, but he put it on the main, the death of a craftsman. And that is negative. We know that artisan is the opposite of artist. And so in the history of French cinema, the craftsman, the artisan of cinema, and then starting with that, with the title The Day After His Death, is negative. And because the
cinéphilique, comme c'est des gens bien, ils n'allaient pas dire des choses désagréables.
He didn't want to say some terrible things on people that just died, but wanted to say pleasant things.
Et il y a ça toujours. Et c'est une vraie histoire. Alors, comme
being contradiction. So, since cinema is not interesting for anything except made for us, but Frémaux, who is another intellectual, he criticizes all the time the Cannes Festival because he believes from Pichapong or author films are presented too many. And he found the film on Kilimanjaro. He said, this is the film that we would like to see in Cannes, but actually this was presented in Cannes. They're a little crazy, and I wouldn't say... I wouldn't want to be blamed as a cinephiliac, but because I read the Cahiers and Proust once is enough. So there is always this side to be taken into consideration. And from an intellectual viewpoint, it is interesting. For instance, in Noiret, you talked before about Lord Champol. Well, there we see that it's very interesting, but he is afraid. He is really afraid, because if we look at the references, he was afraid that Tavernier, the filmmaker, was the same as the cinephiliac Tavernier, and it's not true. Without Noiret, the film cannot be made, and Bertrand accompanies him. And in 22, the first parts of his memoir are published, and he tells, along with Charles Mérieux, industrialist of Lyon, who was a cinephiliac. So he had given some money to Bertrand for this purpose. And he would say, isn't this film too bit too much on the left side? And Bertrand was this type. He had a deep fear, and Tavernier, the father, had founded a magazine in Lyon during the occupation time, and they would host personalities of all types, that the ones who would oppose the Vichy policy, Aragon and Elsa. And it's in their house that Aragon has written Il n'y a pas plus de poème d'amour. This means that Aragon had an ill feeling. This is his last film, 3 hours, and the film cinema. And Van Bovel starts, and it starts with a Rue de Première Film, to close. And so this is the itinerary of a filmmaker and a cinephiliac. I wanted to talk about another aspect of Bertrand, who was a little strange. He was amusing, and we talked a lot about this in our meetings, and he would laugh during meals. Well, now we have almost finished our time. But there was another thing that I wanted to say. What are the 3 films you prefer of Bertrand? But I also wanted to ask you, what are we going to do now? There was the pandemic. We had to abandon Tavernier. Well, the conversation is still ongoing. I'm a little bit hesitant. You should pick what you say, because I'm too long in answering. The 3 films of the film, I'm going to tell you 3. And tomorrow there are going to be 3 different ones. But I could say, undoubtedly, Rien d'autre, that La vie, rien d'autre, that show the consequences of things happening, the war in this case, the consequences of the war, and then Captain Conan, the fake ending of the war, and La vie, rien d'autre is very nice. If you read the letter of that Philippe Noiret writes to Sabine Renoir, very nice. Couture show. And I saw it Torchon, Capitaine Torchon. Well, this is a film, if you will see it now, it's very important. And who could remake something similar? Well, I answer, it would be difficult. And then the Voyage dans le cinéma français as documentary. La guerre son nom, very nice. Lyon, le regard intérieur. And it's a film on Lyon, which is a beautiful film. And then I can't remember the title, but it's a documentary work that is really beautiful. Drum d'Eritique that is underestimated, and he did it with fighting against many difficulties. Also, a nice film. Now, for the pandemic, and you referred to it before, well, we cannot talk a lot about it because otherwise we would take too much time. Cannes, the film festival, ended 1 week ago. Well, it marked a time, and cinema is not dead because we heard before that cinema had died. I have never seen on French press an article against the platforms, for instance. I've never seen it. And when I say against, it's not to be opposing platforms. I have subscription to all. But we have read many things against cinema. and the press conference in Cannes, said that the cinema in Cannes Cannes is the old world and platform is the new world. Now this is nonsense. Of course, cinema, movie theaters were closed. Many challenges had to be faced, and the art films have no future. Well, it's a splendid sentence, but it's false, absolutely false, as many things that have been said. Now we can say that there are many uncertainties, of course, in production, realizing films. Now, the time has been a long one, and afterwards there was the onset of the films of the films in the 50s, then the videos, and now the platforms. Cinema had always to fight against the new enemies, but it managed to adjust. Video, the internet, but cinema is still alive, but it has been dead also because the movie theaters were closed and shootings were stopped. And since cinema could not say any longer who it was because everything was closed down, there is this extraordinary role of the Netflix platforms and others that is reformed, that is wonderful. So we have to live with what we have at our disposal. Platforms, yes, we can combine it with television, but cinema is cinema, and I said it also last year. You can be too optimistic or pessimistic. And now in France, the situation is better than the United States because they are prisoners of their concepts. They made films for children and they had the adult audiences disappear, vanish. And of course, they have wonderful artists, but of course, platforms play an important role. I'm thinking about Ericman that could be produced what Scorsese wanted to do for a long time. So I believe that what is really passion-raising now is the pandemic. At the beginning in France, there were two ridiculous tricks because we knew we couldn't proceed with and applauding some authors, but we have to applaud them, the ones who was feeling sick and the ones that could overcome it. And now and it has passion raising to talk about the world after pandemic, as we said on the phone. The Scarface is the world of the tattooed, and we cinephiliacs, we can say that the world of afterwards is our own world. We have to put questions on the side of going to the movie theater and being on the screen, a physical and cerebral relationship. And what the cinema is, we see excellent things on platforms. We have had a great part of our culture, culture is due to video, but we see that the idea of cinema is like a press, and I don't want to generalize in this sense, but it's the press part of this. I want to decide that cinema is something of the past, and I want to mention Bertrand, who mentioned Faulkner, and the cinema is not dead at all, still present, and I think there is and how it has been saved by artists, by professionals, by the press, and by the public itself. And we, in order to do Cannes, and they told us, no, it's not possible. No, it's enough to have professionals and press present, and this is sufficient because nothing can replace an echo, voices. We heard it, we saw it last night. Nothing can replace. A festival is alive, is a live event, and it must be live. It's a living self. And it's the cinephilics who have created the box office, the poster, the books. Well, Le Maçon is a print version.
Et j'ai pris le chapitre. C'est à ça que ça sert les... Vous venez de publier le...
The Buffon was very interesting, and the book of Peter Fodbach, or the one of Aldo Onfellini. And this is what festivals serve for, historians. Well, books are written about them. And now it's the first year, and already it's the third decade of this century. If we think of world wars last century, and after the pandemic, and after World War I, the years were crazy. And then the years of hope, Cannes, very linked to Italy in 1939. Well, there was something against it by Italy. And then in 1946, we have Rossellini and the hope. So what can we do? We are cinephiliacs. And we are also, and we know that we are all important people working in one own corner. They tell me, bravo, good to do Cannes. It's a privilege to make this job, make this festival. And we cinephilic know that after World War II, Rossellini and Truffaut, at that time, they thought that in the post-war period, we thought that we could go ahead and go through cinema. And I think that the world will have to pass through cinema, because we have a lot to say and on what cinema has to give us. And it's not simply a work of a back office, but it's something with the Cinema Ritrovato is the cinema of the future that is going to be as rich. And if we want platforms to have filmmakers that make them work, we will need to discover new filmmakers. Thank you, Thierry, of the quality of your presentation, for the joy, the depth, the passion you have put in this. I want to show Michel Simon. Otherwise, Michel Simon will create problems for me if I don't show it. This is the special issue on Bertrand, positive. Next year, we will have 2 hours devoted to this subject. Thank you, Thierry.